As I stated in my latest video, the aggressive so-called criticism of Sword Art Online that has been a trend on YouTube, seen employed by people like Mother's Basement, Digibro, and Anime Man, to name just a few, for a large part of this decade is actually part of a psychological operation meant to feminize people and deter them from the thing that the elite fear the most: otaku masculinity. So the two big questions are, why SAO? And does this go far beyond SAO? The answer to the latter question is simply yes. This extends far beyond SAO and has even trained a pattern into many weak-minded individuals that keeps them in a state of perpetual femininity and weakness. So, what exact ideas people commonly express upon being triggered by Sword Art Online are a little difficult to define, as they are often incomplete thoughts of semi-coherent ideas that don't really have a beginning or end. They just sort of go off. And I need a fucking cut right there because I did not say that right. What exact ideas people commonly express upon being triggered by Sword Art Online are a little difficult to define, as they are often incomplete thoughts or semi-coherent ideas that don't really have a beginning or end, or in some cases just technical criticisms made with no actual attempt at backing them with critical theory. But the common thread we most commonly see among all of them is a big issue taken with the main character, Kirigaya Kazuto, better known by his handle name, Kirito, and his fate in the world of the story. The most common way for these people to decorate their anguish at the series is by claiming that Kirito's success in the story is not believable, and that the world he lives in is also not believable. This may seem like innocent criticisms, but if that's all they were, there wouldn't be such animosity or defensiveness. It's like these people are being attacked by the story itself and desperately need to defend themselves. So why is that? To understand the nature of SAO's storytelling, it is vital to first look at the context in which the story was originally written. Many people think of the current decade when they think of Sword Art Online, but it is vital to remember that the story was originally written back in 2001 and published in 2002, predating even .hack by a little bit. The internet was a hot subject at the turn of the decade, or even the millennium rather, and it certainly showed up a lot in anime and otaku works. Less important than the subject of the internet, however, is the medium of eroge, visual novels in general, and simulation/adventure games. When thinking about the eroge VN sim game scene, I like to think of it in three semi-distinct eras. The first era I call the perverted, or ecchi era. The novelty of making erotic games often meant that there was a conscious level recognition on the part of both the makers of the games and the consumers that they were being at least a little perverted for making them or playing them, at least in society's eyes. And that consciousness was often reflected in the content of the games. My ballpark estimate is that this era went from the 80s into the early 90s. The next era was what I call the virtual or escapist era. The increasing demand for not only sexual fulfillment from these games, but also romantic fulfillment, meant that games that specifically focus on strong romantic relationships between the player character and capsule heroines became the norm. Non-erotic simulation games became incredibly popular in this era, many of which can be found on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. I'd ballpark this era as between the early mid-90s and late 90s. And finally, the era spanning until present day is what I call the storytelling era. With the novelty of virtualizing relationships wearing off a bit, eroge creators wanted to push the level of satisfactions that their games could provide. This meant dramatically expanding the ambition of the storytelling component, while not losing track of the importance of the sexual satisfaction or romantic satisfaction component, but rather uniting it with the elements of advanced storytelling. This is when now famous writers such as Jun Maeda, Ryukishi 7, Genichiro Buchi, and Kinoko Nas made their names known through the medium. Keep in mind that none of this is to say that I am describing the only type of game made during each era, but rather the most common type of game made in each. So how does this relate to Sword Art Online? It is very obvious if you look at SAO, especially in the form it was originally written in, just how much influence Reki Kawahara took from specifically the visual novel scene of the time. In fact, I would take a guess that if given the opportunity to employ a team, Reki Kawahara wouldn't have hesitated to make SAO a visual novel. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because it has significant impact on the theme and format of SAO storytelling. As I stated, Eroge started off as a more utility-driven product, that utility being sexual or romantic satisfaction. And even as they developed into the storytelling era, they never forgot about that utility. SAO completely applies this utility element to the format of traditional prose. SAO employs the utility of romantic satisfaction and sexual satisfaction to an extent, but more importantly than those, it employs another type of utility, and that is what is often derogatorily referred to as the power fantasy. Utility in otaku works is often looked down upon by normies, fake anime fans, and self-loathing anime fans as something that makes you into a loser if you indulge it. And the power fantasy is no exception. The truth is very much the opposite. Utility in otaku works only makes your life greatly better by freeing you from the destructive and degenerate shackles that our modern society has chained you with. They grant a perspective on life that is constructive to replace the negative perspective you were originally fed. This is increasingly true when an otaku work not only provides the given utility, but also explores and elaborates on the nature of that utility. Just like the visual novels from brands such as Key provided and explored the nature of romantic utility in the medium, Sword Art Online explored the nature of the power fantasy. This exploration is important because it means the work goes beyond simply providing this life-improving utility, but also provides you the philosophical understanding necessary to take confidence in and get the most out of the utility it provides. That makes for a piece of fiction that quite literally makes your life much better if engaged with properly. A work that can help you avoid bad life decisions, give you the motivation to work at something worthwhile, or even help you know the right decision to make. So why would such a benevolent work like this trigger people so badly? Well, let's take a look at how Sword Art Online enlightens the reader/viewer and then find out. The first thing that SAO establishes is that we are not meant to take its world seriously in the literal sense. We need no suspension of disbelief because there is no need for belief in the first place. This is an extremely common pattern with highly utility-driven otaku works. The work right out of the gate, or nearly right out of the gate, slams you with a supernatural or highly improbable scenario that makes its appeal extremely clear. Perhaps the most iconic example of this is the girl falls from the sky trope. What this technique does is it makes the reader focused more on ideals rather than literal physics or superficial logic. This allows stories to quickly and effectively cut to the heart of their themes. Sword Art Online does this with the fictional video game Sword Art Online and the virtual reality technology that backs it. I've never actually read the official publication version, and I know there are some changes, but in the beginning of the web novel at least, Kirito narrates very clearly how appealing the virtual world is as an escape from the restrictions of reality. There are very few otaku who would not understand this appeal. The story of SAO then progresses, with Kirito finding out just how dissimilar he is to the other players at the game, eventually becoming the hero of the game and freeing everyone who is trapped in the game. Reki Kawahara could have just as easily written the story of a heroic swordsman without the virtual reality element. What the virtual reality element does is put all the emphasis on how much becoming a hero is an ideal rather than an easily achievable reality. Kirito is not exceptional in the real world, but rather in the game world, and he is exceptional there for the same exact reason he is initially a loser in the real world, and that is his otaku ideals. Because Kirito harbors such intense ideals, he cannot cope with the real world, where ideals are smothered and suffocated. He holds up in his room and as a result becomes estranged from his cousin's sister. But the virtual world is designed to reward those with ideals, opposite of the real world, which punishes them. SAO as a story is not about pedantic world building, but rather ideals and what it means to possess them. What it means to possess the kind of ideals that Kirito does. The Aincrad arc of Sword Art Online is actually split into several different stories, each of which nearly independently work as complete stories unto themselves. The anime adapted those stories by inserting the standalone stories in between episodes of the main Aincrad story covered by Book 1. People like Digibro have criticized this format for killing the momentum of the tension built up by the beginning of the story. Not only is this not true due to the way that the main source of tension in the story comes from Kirito's psychological state and far less from the actual superficial struggles, but it also completely misses the point of the story's format. Each story in SAO is like an independent dream. Both the narrative style of the books and directorial style of the show emphasize this. Each dream highlights, observes, and explores a different aspect of Kirito's otaku ideals. Each of these ideals highlights, observes, and explores a different expression of otaku masculinity. By being dreams and not reality, we are consistently reminded that the way in which those values are making Kirito strong in the virtual world is not possible in the same way in reality, something that is constantly being lamented in the undertones of the story. The way it often emphasizes the polygamous ideal of otaku masculinity is what's important here. And this is something you can see in visual novels almost all the time. The polygamous ideal is something I've talked about in my talk on Asahina Mikuru from Suzumiya Haruhi no Yutsu. The otaku understand that they are special. They hold on to masculine ideals while the rest of the world has lost them. Therefore, it is their ideal to have as many girls as possible to rely on them for salvation, since there is not enough strong men to go around. In SAO, we see this show up whenever there is a female character that becomes emotionally attached to Kirito. There's a great contrast between Kirito and the other males in the story wherever this occurs. Kirito's otaku ideals have made him reliable to the girls in a way that the other males simply are not, either because they don't possess the same ambition that Kirito does in the world, or they just do not have the confidence to act upon their ideals should they hold them. Perhaps the most interesting place this shows up is in Sachi's story, which is episode 3, but it's too complex to the point where I will have to devote a talk specifically to that episode. So, the next, perhaps most important aspect of otaku masculinity developed in the show is that of abandon, the nature of otaku abandon. This is best expressed in the way Kirito fights. By dual wielding and going all out on the offensive, usually accompanied by his iconic screaming while doing so, he is expressing the act of putting everything on the line for something he believes in doing. It is an extremely common pattern for the heroes of otaku works to have their abandon be the most critical element of their success. The otaku can express this in real life by charging headfirst into something that may put them at odds with society or even risk their future security. And for me personally, this is the most inspiring element of the otaku hero. SAO contrasts Kirito's all-out offensive style with the villain, Heathcliff, who fights in a more traditional knight image. He even has a cross symbol on his shield, which we will see here. Heathcliff's true identity is Kayaba Akihito, the main engineer and designer of the game Sword Art Online. And Heathcliff possesses many of the same qualities and ideals as Kirito, but he instead lives as a defeated man, resigned to express his ideals in a sadistic and purely escapist manner. His defensive fighting style symbolizes his inability to employ the same abandon that Kirito learns to employ while in the virtual world. Kirito also expresses his abandon through acts like risking his life while grinding by fighting strong monsters, solo, and even, when he charges in to fight the Gleam Eyes without proper preparation. And so the priority of one's values over one's own immediate life is essential to otaku masculinity and the main source of great power. And so the last element of otaku masculinity expressed by Kirito is the nature of the Omega Alpha. The Omega Alpha is what I call the personality type commonly seen in the heroes of otaku works, where they have both the traits of an Omega personality type and an Alpha. There is always a very fine line between having this character be a complete loser and being the biggest winner. They have an extremely hard time fitting in and making friends, and they can act even cowardly and weak at times, turning people away from them. However, under the right conditions, they can act incredibly powerfully and boldly, inspiring others and earning devoted allies. This stems from the way in which otaku have incorporated dark and feminine elements into their expressions of masculinity. The otaku are much more comfortable with darkness and negativity than traditionally masculine figures who typically seek to act in a way that is wholeheartedly confident and illuminating to onlookers. So one of the ways this dark element of otaku masculinity can manifest is in a chunibyo fashion, and thus Kirito's black swordsman persona. This is a significant element of otaku because it allows otaku to thrive in places where the traditional alpha male would crumble. Otaku are much more resilient and flexible due to their ability to tolerate and even employ negativity constructively. So, finally we see having dreams so lucid as the ones he experienced in the virtual reality is what ultimately inspires Kirito to be able to fix things in the real world. And this is expressed by the way in which he restores his relationship with his cousin sister Suguha. This parallels the way in which the reader/viewer of SAO is able to take the otaku ideals explored in otaku works and apply them to their own life. SAO is telling you that values expressed in otaku media do not only belong in fantasy or virtual worlds, but can also manifest in the real world, even if it is harder for them to do so there. And this is the most crucial element in triggering weak or evil people. What these people fear is just that, people gaining otaku powers and employing them in the real world. An extremely common entry point into attacking SAO is trying to criticize the logic of the world building, despite the fact that the story is so intuitively designed to dispel the reader or viewer's concerns for such. While this can come off as simple autism, the problem lies much deeper. What someone is trying to do when they make this argument is they are trying to bully their viewers into doubting otaku power. They are trying to convince them that otaku power is not a thing. If you look at Mother's Basement's video, What is in a Scene, how SAO became the worst anime ever, right here, you'll notice that all he does is apply contrived logic to the story. Logic that the story intuitively makes clear has no place being applied. While GF might not be the brightest, I am sure that even he realizes this. What he is doing is not simply ignorant. It is nefarious. GF's criticisms are not based in logic, but rather a religious value system expressed through atheistic principles. Atheistic principles are really just an extension of Christian and other Abrahamic principles. What this means is that Geoff and others who act like him are trying to dominate otaku expressions and wisdom with their Yahwehnian value system and frame. Some people, like Digibro, do this simply because they are threatened by the Yahwehnian value system and therefore feel like they must appease it. Digi cannot have confidence or faith in his otaku values because he cannot conceive of a way to defeat Yahweh with them. This is why SAO causes so much internal conflict in him and similar people. He is being inspired and enlightened, and yet he doesn't have the confidence to actually employ what he learned. He sees Kirito in a parallel situation. However, Kirito does actually act on his values. Kirito does have the ability to reject Yahweh. Digibro and others like him grow angry and embittered by this. They give into that anger and jealousy and express it with nihilism. On the other hand, we have people like Geoff who are merely evil to the core. No part of them is even thinking about rebelling against Yahweh. These people are fake anime fans and should be treated with extreme and utter discrimination and rejection. Now, Sword Art Online is not by any means unique. In fact, you can basically assume that any work will receive this kind of bigotry by a value proportionate to the extent of its beneficial utility multiplied by its popularity. The Yahwehnian assault on otaku values will continue until the otaku are able to liberate themselves from invaders and leeches. When that day comes, the otaku will experience a golden age. May true God be with you.